Hello and welcome to another episode of the Debrief Station. In this episode, we're sitting down with someone who says they've experienced something truly anomalous. We're not here to judge or sensationalize. We're just here to listen with an open mind. These kinds of stories challenge our understanding of reality, and today we're giving one experiencer the space to share theirs. His name is Ray Hardy, and he is a lifelong experiencer of high strangeness, and from seeing fully structured UFOs to poltergeist activity. He recently started the UAP Insight Podcast and is currently working on that alongside his first documentary film focusing on the UAP phenomenon right here in the Pacific Northwest. So let's just get into it. Ray, thanks for being here. Just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am 28 years old, born in Stockton, California, but I moved up to northeastern Washington when I was extremely young. And I kind of had the blessing to grow up in an area that is so rich in, not just, Native American history, but also world history. We have, down in like Pasco, Kennewick area, the Hanford nuclear plant, which has had multiple encounters with UAP UFO throughout, the entirety of its existence. You go back to 1947, you have the Kenneth Arnold sightings, and just on and on and on. And now I'm thankful to live just a few minutes away from the Columbia River, which, is one of the most intense, I think, drawings to paranormal and UFO activities in the Pacific Northwest, followed only by like Mount Rainier and, the lower Columbia Basin going into the Scablands. So throughout my life, I've had tons of experiences. I mean, they started off, very early age. I was maybe between 4 and 6 years old, and I saw my first ever UFO. I was camping with my grandma at Box Canyon Dam up in Ione, Washington. And it's just a small little campground with an artificial lake right next to a hydroelectric dam. And I was on a dock out in the middle of the lake, and I felt the need to turn around and look at the dam. And when I saw this craft, it was about, I want to say about 100 to 200 feet above the dam. And it was broad daylight. We're talking, maybe 11:30 to 12:30 in the morning. Or like 11:30 to 12:30 afternoon. And it was shaped like a croissant of all things, but it was like flattened, but you could still see kind of the ridges along it. And it was kind of a silvery bronze, and about 30 to 40 feet across. You could see from the angle of observation just a slight curve at the ends, and it was just sitting there for 20 to 30 seconds, and then it just zipped off 0 to Mach 10 faster than you could blink. I mean, if I wasn't looking at it, I wouldn't have believed that it could have gone that fast.
That's pretty normal, I've heard, with a lot of UFO sightings, how they just take off instantaneous speed. And how far away do you think it was from you?
It was probably about 400 feet away.
Okay.
So I was close enough. I mean, I couldn't see any portholes or windows or anything. But what was the most fascinating about this encounter was not the encounter with the UFO itself. It was the fact that, about a minute after it zipped off, a pair of U.S. Air Force fighter jets came carving through the trees, flying in the same direction that it zipped off in.
Oh, wow.
About 5 or 6 hours after I saw the sighting, so it was, towards the evening, sun was starting to get a little lower on the horizon. one of the pilots of, I believe it was either a F-15 or an F-16, came to the campground, and I had been standing on the dock when the jets came flying through, kind of turned sideways to cut between a pair of trees, and the force from just the the backwash from the jet threw me 10 to 15 feet off at the dock. The pilot of the second jet had seen me, being, launched into the air by the backwash from the first one, and he came to the campground and, made sure I was okay. And, I was like,
So
hey, did you see? Yeah, they were flying at about 50 feet.
Oh, wow.
It was the lowest I've seen a fighter fly outside of an air show. And he literally had to turn sideways to cut between a pair of trees, because there was a couple of trees that were about 75 feet tall that were about 15 feet apart. He cut sideways to just slice, thread the needle right between the two trees, and kind of bank up and fly right after it. And the pilot that came to the campground was, telling me, yeah, I did see that too. This isn't the first time that we've chased this thing away from here. So at that point, I kind of learned, there was a connection between UFOs and this hydroelectric dam. And that kind of initially got me thinking, okay, well, obviously there's something more in the universe than just, airplanes and dinosaurs and the pollywogs in the little lagoon over there, So that was my first real encounter that I remember. And from there, it just kind of was sporadic throughout life. I was, the summer, like the end of that summer was right when I was starting like kindergarten or first grade. And, at that same time, this was, just a few months after my brother had committed suicide. He had committed suicide at the beginning of that year, and going camping with my grandma was helping me deal with that. And then at the start of the following school year, I was entered into my school's gifted and talented program.
You in the GATE program?
Yes.
How old were you when you first got involved in
that? I was right around the same age. I was 5, 6 years old, kindergarten, first grade. And it was, kind of fun to me at the time, because, I got to leave my normal classes and go to these special classes where we did all these really cool things. We got to play these guessing games, is what I called them at the time, where they basically put up like a barrier, like, the test barrier that they put up in grade schools to keep you from looking at other kids' desks when you're taking a test. So they'd set those up, and, they'd have somebody on the other side of it holding up, like either like specific playing cards or, small objects. And your goal was to guess the most correct out of the whole class.
What was the environment like in that class?
It was a lot more kind of like you could just kind of do your own thing compared to a regular structured classroom. Like if you had a particular interest, you'd be encouraged to, explore that interest. But at the same time, there was also required things. Some of the required things were like the guessing games and, like the hearing tests, where they would take you out to like this bus out in the parking lot. And I don't know if the bus ever moved or whatnot while we were in it, but I do remember that they put on headphones similar to what I'm wearing now, just without the microphone on it. And I've since learned in the last couple of months, since I started listening to Hemisync by the Monroe Institute, the original Hemisync, that is what they were playing through the headphones at the time. And it would be hour to hour and a half long sessions. And, looking at, like what you see on Spotify for the Gateway program tapes, they're about 15 minutes a piece. So that would kind of work out to about an hour, a little over an hour.
Very
and they would play through all of them. And then as soon as the hearing test was done, we'd come back into the classroom we were doing this program in. And then we would do a second round of guessing game for that day.
Interesting. That kind of sounds like they were measuring like a baseline and like an after your hearing test to see how it affected you. Was there anything else that stood out to you about who these people were running this test?
So the actual testing was done by a educator at the school, but a lot of the results were sent, from what I understand, they were sent outside of the school district. And at the same time, they were also strongly encouraging research into the military at that age. So from age 5 or 6 all the way up until when I left the program at the end of 4th grade. Yeah, they always kind of pushed for it to be more military or advanced science focused, as opposed to, like, this is an ant farm, or rather than that, it would be, this is the specific process for the geothermal energy to be captured from like a underground magma chamber or something like that.
They didn't sugarcoat anything. They just told you straight up what it was.
Essentially, it was they wanted you to go further and deeper into subjects than any normal class would have. I mean, like for the volcano example or the magma chamber, geothermal energy, I didn't start learning about that again after leaving that program until senior year of high school. And even that was, just kind of a brief overview. That's not anywhere close.
That's because they wanted your unbiased opinion as a child, because of the fact that you were malleable and you didn't have all these, oh, you cannot do this, you cannot do this. When you're growing up, you're told that, oh, this is all imaginary. Forget about that. Yeah, right.
Did you ever feel like there was some kind of pressure with these activities that they had you doing for them? Like, were they pressuring you into doing them? Did you feel any kind of is there there's some kind of hidden meaning behind it?
At first, I didn't feel that way, but during the 4th grade year, when they essentially said, this is your project, you're going to do a project on the U.S. Air Force, and this is you have to go speak to this same Air Force staff sergeant that you've been talking to for 5-6 years at this point. And we need you to do a deep dive project on the lesser known aspects of the Air Force. So that's the Air Force. Most people don't even think about stuff like the Air Force Corps of Engineers, or like the ground crews. You think Air Force, you think airmen, you think somebody flying around, or being the tail gunner in a B-52, or something like that. But it was to focus more on for me in particular, I ended up focusing on Air Force intelligence. So I was able to, spend, about 6 months of that school year doing a deep dive on AFOSI to learn specifically how they do investigations. AFOSI, for listeners who might not be aware, Air Force Office of Special Investigations.
Okay. Did you ever have any kind of odd moments while you were in this program? Did you ever share what was going on with any of your other classmates?
I mean, it wasn't explicitly stated, but while we were in the program, it felt as though it was, meant to not be spoken about outside, if that makes sense. As though, what we were doing in there was only for us, which made us special, because I think there was between 6 and 8 kids in this school of, I think there was 400 kids in the school at the time total, but there was only 6 of us in that class.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they were real short classes from what I understand. They were only like within, I think, 4 to 6 people or less.
Oh, wow. Did you ever see any kind of connections between your time in these classes to any of your odd experiences later on in life?
Not until the last 3 or 4 months. I had a guest on my podcast, Shane Frakes, who people online might be familiar with as Old Vet Symposium. And he encouraged me to start meditating and, listening to Hemisync and trying to explore what might be locked away inside of my mind. And, since I've started doing that, I've experienced, everything from, meditating for what I feel is, 10 minutes, but really is, 30 minutes. And, just having, flashes of images in my mind and, which one of which was fairly recent. It was about a week and a half ago, or maybe closer to 2 weeks at this point. But I was meditating as I was laying there going to bed, and I had this image in my head of what looked like a bowling pin, as though it was viewed through like a FLIR image, or like an AT FLIR or at FLIR. And, it seemed to be rotating. Let me see if I can orient this. It was kind of about this orientation, and it was just rotating back and forth very slowly, like probably 30 to 40 degrees side to side rotation. And it seemed as though the bottom was kind of growing and shrinking a little bit. And, I didn't think anything of it. I just kind of made a note to myself, because I've started keeping a journal of, what I see as I'm meditating. I was just kind of laying there trying to go to sleep, and I saw this in my mind's eye. So I make a note of it, and, the next morning, Shane posted on X that, have you ever noticed that, as you're, entering a semi-hypnagogic state, such as when you're like drifting off to sleep, you get a very clear image in your mind. And, it kind of refreshed my memory that, oh yeah, I saw that. So I sent him a screenshot and was like, yeah, I took a screenshot of his tweet and sent it to him and was like, hey, yeah, I had this happen last night. Well, fast forward to a couple of days ago, and I was speaking to a friend in the intelligence community, and I asked him, hey, is there any videos of a UAP that kind of matched this description. And he kind of stopped for a moment and he was like, yeah, but that's not public yet. So that kind of lets me know that, you know, I have somewhat developed I wouldn't quite say it's remote viewing, but maybe more remote sensing at this point. Yeah, some sort of connection that I don't know if I've ever really had to that level. But I have had other kind of weird experiences with, you know, what felt like a strange connection. And we can get into that if you want to.
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, so this was something that happened, I believe it was June or July of 2016. And I was driving from my house in Chewelah, Washington, down to Spokane, Washington. And this was about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. I was just taking a drive to clear my mind, and, you know, as a teenager does, you know, when they're, you know, 19 going on 20. And as I'm driving, I get forced off the road by state police into a way station just before I get to Deer Park, which is about halfway between Chewelah and Spokane. So I pull into this way station because, you know, I see this huge line of, you know, what looks like emergency vehicles from far away. And I pull in and I point my car towards the road, and I start seeing, you know, I see 2 or 3 Bearcats or, you know, armored vehicles, followed by 4 or 5 Humvees, followed by a long flatbed truck with something on the bed that was covered completely by a black tarp. And it seemed as though it was just slightly tilting front to back. It was, I can't even really describe the shape because it was dark and covered with a black tarp. But at one point, right as it was going past me, a little section of the tarp flew up just enough for me to see just like this brilliant, like, it was like a silver, but not any silver that I had ever seen. And it was, you know, almost to the point of self-illumination, but it was just from the moonlight glancing off of it. So, you know, very shortly after I saw that, I just felt like a wave of emotions hit me. And it was as though I was feeling, you know, 8 different emotions at once, and I couldn't quite describe it. And, you know, but I just felt like I saw something important. You know, for a little while I thought, oh, I just watched them trailering a nuke up to Canada, which is what my mind instantly went to, because Fairchild Air Force Base has been known to host nuclear weapons in the past. And that's just outside of Spokane. So for all I knew, they were just transporting northbound to, you know, get to a secure location, either up in Canada or maybe up in Alaska or something like that. So I'm like, okay, cool. I might have seen a nuke, but something didn't quite track with that story in the back of my head. So I just kind of blow it off, and I'm like, okay, whatever. This is just, you know, something weird that happened. Well, the next day, I'm at my dad's house, and we're working on a car together. We were working on getting it back on the road after it had been sitting for 16 years or so. And just as we're wrapping up for the day, we're now at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon or so. We're standing in the garage. He's, 20 feet in front of me, standing next to the toolbox, and I'm standing right next to this row of shelves that we used for, just like pantry storage and, some car parts and stuff. And right behind my knees was the shelf that we used for car parts. And we had a fuel pump sitting on the shelf right there. And my dad is, 20 feet in front of me, and he's looking at me, and I just suddenly get this rush of what just felt like very dark, malevolent energy. And this fuel pump that was sitting at knee level behind me flies up and hits me in the back of the head and actually cuts my scalp open a little bit. It hits me so hard. So immediately I freak out. All I can say is, what the F? And, I'm like just freaking out, run out to my car. And, I hit 60 miles an hour in town in less than 3 blocks trying to get back to my house. I'm freaking out so much. And all I can say is, what the F, for about 4 hours after that. And that was kind of the first and last time I've ever truly experienced poltergeist activity. After about an hour or so after the flatbed went by, it was like, okay, well, that's cool. I felt all these emotions, but I was probably just me, being weird like I usually am. So I just went back home after that, because I was, just out for a drive. I was 35-40 minutes from home. So I'm like, okay, well, I better go back home, because, I was looking for a job at the time. So I was going out job searching the next day after, before I went to work on the car. And, I had completely forgotten the wave of emotions until the fuel pump hit me in the back of the head. And this wasn't like what you think of as a modern fuel pump. This was about 10 inches long or so and weighed about 2.5-3 pounds, compared to a modern fuel pump, which is, maybe 5 inches tall and, maybe half a pound at most.
Whatever threw this at you, it came at you with some force.
Yeah. I mean, it was enough to where it cut my scalp open and left me bleeding. I mean, which, it's, as a 19-year-old, something like that happening on that level for the first time, it really makes you think, okay, what kind of demon did I just piss off? But I've never been a really religious person, so I don't believe so much in demons or angels or stuff like that. But I do believe in, the possibility of things that I don't understand.
Yeah. Have you had any experiences since then?
No other poltergeist type activities. Up until, March of last year or May of last year, I had, just kind of a few lights in the sky moving around, which were, cool, but I couldn't verify that those were UFOs, UAP. And then, one day I get home from work and it's, just starting to get dark. I can still see the last traces of the sunlight to the west. And I see this brilliant orb just sitting there at, probably 500 to 1,000 feet in elevation at a perfect 45-degree angle of inclination from me. And it's just sitting there. And then, I'm like, oh, wow, that's definitely not normal. there's no way this is a space station because, space station would be moving. And also it wasn't scheduled to come by my specific area for another 3 hours after. So I take my phone out and I start recording using an app called Phenom UFO, which one of my friends has created this app. And it captures like your magnetic data and angle and motion and all that kind of scientific data to help promote scientific study into the phenomenon. So I take it out and I start recording, and as soon as I start recording, it kind of wobbles a little bit and then just starts moving directly towards true north, not magnetic north, but true north. And this thing was just silently, moving along. And, after a little while, I stopped recording with the app and I grabbed a pair of binoculars, managed to get them just in time before it went behind some trees. And I looked through the binoculars at it, and it was this beautiful, like, golden bronze color. And it had a slight groove going completely around it about a third of the way from the top. And it was just a metallic sphere, and I couldn't tell exactly how big it was, but I know that it was 500 to 1,000 feet up. Not a single sound. I checked ADS-B records for that day, and there was no aircraft flying in the area. So I was like, okay, well, that was definitely a genuine, UAP sighting. So, that was really cool. It was just slowly moving, maybe 10, 15 miles an hour, just extremely slow. And, with no, flight surfaces, no wings, no, no overt signs of propulsion. That to me fit at least, 2 of the 6 observables. That fits, no source of propulsion and, stealth characteristics. And I ended up seeing it again a few months ago. There was a huge aurora event that happened, I believe in like May of last year, where you could see it as far down as like Louisiana and Texas, and and I was out watching the aurora, and my wife was out there with me because she had never really seen the aurora before. And we're out there and just kind of looking at the aurora, and she's like, "What is that?" and points to kind of the southeast. So I look up, and it's the same exact thing. Same exact size, same exact luminosity, except this is now at 11:30 at night, 2 months later. And, I didn't have any binoculars with me at the time, and, my phone was in the house, so I didn't have a chance to record it at that point, but it was just the same brilliance. And, just, it was as though it was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't interpret what it was saying, if that makes sense.
So it was just like you were getting some kind of like feeling from it.
It's almost as though it was sharing an instinct, would be the way I would describe it. As though there was something that I was supposed to know that, I just couldn't understand. So I'm almost wondering if maybe, I just haven't had a chance to learn yet what it was telling me then.
So take me to this experience that you said you had about 2 weeks ago.
So this was about about a week and a half ago, I decided, I'm going to start speaking publicly about my experience in the GATE program and, a little bit more about my experiences with the phenomenon overall. So I've measured it out now. It's about 77 feet from the back of my house to a little clearing in the woods behind my house. And so I leave my front door at 10 o'clock exactly on the nose. I have me leaving on security footage as well as me returning to the house 20 minutes later. And, I go out and I record this, 7.5 minute video for TikTok so that I can, start sharing the story. And as soon as I finish recording, I lock my phone and I put it in my pocket and I turn around to walk back to my house, which is kind of up a hill that's, about 15 degrees angular. And, if it was daylight, I could just barely see the top of my house, maybe a little bit of the glow from the yellow light on my porch. But I can't see any of the neighbors' houses, anything like that. But in front of me, I see 3 brilliantly white lights, like bright to the point where I have to kind of shield my eyes like that. And, it was, as soon as I went to shield my eyes, I look up and, there's nothing immediately familiar around me. So I'm like, whoa, what just happened here? So I pull up my phone and it's gone from about, 80, 90% charge down to about 10% charge. And I open up the Apple Maps and I notice that I'm 2 miles from my house by road. Instantaneously. Not even a minute had passed from the end of recording this video. So I start freaking out and, I kind of figure out exactly where I am. I find my way to the road through this copse of trees with a clearing in it that I've come to say that I landed in. And I find my way to the road and I follow it back to my house. I'm running this whole time, which I haven't really run in years, but I managed to cover 2 miles in just a little over 11 minutes to get back home. And I get home, I'm in full panic mode. I mean, you can see me on the same security camera coming back to my house almost 20 minutes exactly later. And, I just have a completely different look on my face to when I left. And, I was freaking out, didn't know what happened, coming down from the rush of adrenaline that I had felt. And, I was kind of freaked out, as one would be, because you don't expect to be, move from your house to 2 miles away from your house with no time to react. The average person, they're like, oh, let's go down to this river, which is, 2 minutes away by car. Let's take the car. We'll drive 2 minutes down to the river. And, I was close enough to the Columbia River where I could see the waves kind of crashing against the shore and the lights from the marina that I was at when I noticed that I was moved. So I wrote down kind of my initial thoughts because I have been trying to become a better investigator, to investigate not only, other people's experiences, but also my own. And it was, kind of a surreal experience. And I'm not entirely sure what happened, but the entire thing felt between when I saw the lights and when I saw the lights from the marina, felt as though 2 hours had passed.
And you said you didn't have any smells either, right?
Right. Yeah. It's when I was recording the video for TikTok, I could smell just fine. As soon as I locked my phone, I couldn't smell the pine trees surrounding me. I couldn't smell the earth, which for me was extremely weird because I have a hypersensitive sense of smell. At one time I got into a car and smelled weed that had been smoked in there 3 years prior. So I've always had a very good sense of smell. My olfactory glands are fantastic, but I couldn't smell anything. It was as though all scent had disappeared. And then as soon as I realized that I was no longer in the same place, I could smell everything. I could smell the water from Lake Roosevelt. I could smell the trees surrounding me, the dirt. I mean, I could smell deer crap. Just so almost overwhelming.
When you saw these lights, you said that this smell stopped. What about sounds? Did you hear anything abnormal? Did you hear anything weird?
I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. I mean, senses
affected?
What's that?
Were any of your other senses affected? No.
Which, I mean, that was kind of strange too. But it was a pretty cloudy night, and cloudy nights in my area, you don't tend to hear a lot of like bugs or, animals walking through the wilderness. So it was just kind of the normal, you hear the whooshing of the wind through the valley, along the Columbia River because, it's extremely close. So you can hear it kind of echo up the road. But
interesting. So you said you experienced what you felt was 2 hours of time within this, what you perceived outwardly as an instantaneous travel. That kind of sounds like time dilation to me. Do you think you experienced some kind of experience where they may have created some kind of pocket of time for you that you just don't remember now?
They stopped it.
Yeah, I think it's entirely possible. However, I have no way to truly draw a conclusion because I don't have any truly scientific data to support that. I went out the next day to try and see if there was any issues with, like a stopwatch or a watch in general, or any abnormal radiation readings, and there was nothing in the area whatsoever. None of the trees were burned, and nothing like what you hear from historical events such as like Rendlesham Forest or things like that.
Did your security camera pick up any footage of these bright lights?
It did not.
Wow.
Which my security cameras run off of motion. So if they detect any motion that is, similar to like a human walking or, a deer running past, I think a car at 10 miles an hour is about as much as it can capture when it comes to speed. So if something was moving incredibly fast, the camera wouldn't activate to catch it.
Interesting. So then how did the experience make you feel during this perceived time loss? How did you feel?
I don't really remember, because as soon as I realized that, I was not in the same place that I was, just prior, the last thing that I remembered, was, I was out, within earshot of my house, and all of a sudden I'm 2 miles away. So immediately I just get like a surge of adrenaline, which, you get that fight or flight response when, you're in a situation unexpectedly that, could possibly be dangerous.
That's a
Because
pretty extreme shock to your system. You just showed up 2 miles away from your house. You're like, oh my God.
What the
yeah,
hell's going on?
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So this was only a one-time experience then, right? The most recent one?
Yeah.
This first time you had anything with time dilation or any kind of perceived loss of time. Have you shared this with anyone else?
I have. I shared this with a couple of other experiencers that I've been in contact with for a while, as well as with Washington State MUFON. And there's currently investigation ongoing with regards to my MUFON report. Still in the early stages, but I'd love to share the results with you when I do get those results.
Yeah, please do.
And I've also shared them with some friends that I've made in the intelligence community.
Do you feel there was any kind of purpose to it?
Maybe, but I don't know at this point. I think this is something that I'll need to work on unlocking to understand more fully. One of my friends, who's also an experiencer, has recommended me to Yvonne Smith, who's one of the leading hypno-regression therapists out there at the time. And I'm currently just trying to put together the time and the money to be able to do that. But that I'm hoping by the end of next month I'll have at least one session.
Good.
Well, good luck to you on that.
Yeah.
So then looking back, what do you think happened to you? Do you think you were abducted? Do you think you were taken? What do you think happened?
I think abducted isn't the right word. Taken isn't the right word. The only word that comes to mind is traveled. Because, it's looking back on it, it wasn't an overtly negative experience. And I feel as though I did learn something, but I'm not sure what I learned yet.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
And I hope to learn or relearn or remember what I learned sooner rather than later. But I also know that with this type of experience, you will learn it or remember it when the time is right.
It takes time.
Absolutely. Well, do you have anything else you'd like to share? Any other experiences you'd like to talk about?
I've had too many sightings of UFOs to count. At this point, I've probably had well over 200 personal sightings.
Oh, wow.
Would you consider yourself an experiencer?
Most definitely. I mean, there's no way that I couldn't be at this point based on what other people have told me. So at some point, one has to accept the reality of what you've been through. And I think what I went through last week was the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your experiences with us.
Yeah, definitely,
Absolutely.
man.
Absolutely.
If
And
there's anything that we can do to help or I can do to help, reach out.
I most definitely
Absolutely.
will.
All right. Well, I think that's it. That's it for this episode. So everyone, thanks for watching. Ray, thanks for coming out. We'll have all the information in the description. Go ahead and just leave a comment below if you want to get in touch with Ray or ourselves. So just thanks for watching, guys. Take it easy.